Oh, hey there. Before we dive into today's discussion, I wanted to talk about a fun upcoming opportunity here on the podcast. We will be doing a special episode in December, revolving around vetting, evaluating, and picking partners for your agency, as well as what the partner process looks like for HawkSoft. On this episode, members of the Hug Solution Partner Working Group will be joining us and will be eager to offer their own insight. Here's where you come in. What questions do you have for experienced agency owners about partners? Such as, what do they look for in a partner? What processes do they put in place with a partner? If you have questions for our guests, as well as any about HawkSoft's partner program as a whole, submit your questions by emailing them to marketing@hawksoft.com. That's marketing@hawksoft.com. We look forward to seeing your questions and answering them in December. Thank you. Enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Insurance Perspectives podcast. On today's show, we have with us Kirk Chester.
Hey, Kenny.
Hey. And Jacob Simon.
Hey, Kenny. Thanks for having us on today.
This is part 1 of our series on Adapt API. Next week, in part 2, I'll give a full introduction to Kirk and Grit Insurance Group. But today, our focus is on Jacob Simon, the founder and CEO of Adapt API. I think that I have known Jacob just about the entire length of Adapt's existence. Coming out of, I believe, an incubator or a startup, he took a leap of faith and trusted in HawkSoft and our customers and joined us at a national conference, which is the first place I met him. And I immediately learned 2 things. Jacob is an extremely smart individual, and I really think that intelligence is going to push our industry forward. So as our listeners know, I like to keep my talking to a minimum, which keeps our listeners to a maximum. I am going to start us to dive into this conversation with Adapt API, and Kirk was here to fill in some agency perspectives as we go along the way. Jacob, Adapt has evolved a ton since we first met. Could you kick things off by explaining to our listeners, what does Adapt do? What is your elevator pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for having me on and for the kind introduction. And you are right. When we first met, I think Adapt was, maybe a concept, if that. And then you've kind of seen it through all its evolutions throughout the past couple of years. So, what Adapt is in essence kind of a connectivity solution between carriers and agencies. So, of course, there are some things that are downloading every day already into your management system, but a lot of things don't. And for the things that don't download, that represents a task that a person has to do. They have to go, often log into a website, maybe look in their email, find a notification, find a document, do some copy pasting, maybe some processing to get it in the right format, and get it into their management system. And we solve for that problem by doing all that automatically with software. And what that means is that rather than spending time on these repetitive manual workflows, the agency can focus on the things that actually add value, spending time with customers, focusing on the insurance side of the business as opposed to this like manual copy paste work.
Fantastic.
Further than that, I would say that it allows our team to do the tasks that they don't get to, because it consolidates them all into a one document or one place to look at those tasks.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. So then I will dive into the partner questions that our listeners are familiar with. They're probably definitely at this point sick of me saying it this way, but I'm going to start with an easy one down the middle. HawkSoft really believes in the power of a company or an individual story. And so we like to start things off with, why does Adapt API exist? Why do you participate in the independent agency channel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we could go back quite a ways with this one, but maybe can skip some of the earliest stages. But I think for me, at least, I've always been someone who just kind of loved solving problems, like sticking my teeth into like a really meaty problem and just understanding it, figuring it out, and then creating a full solution. And I think that's what really brought me originally into the technology industry. So I kind of came up as a software engineer, building software in a bunch of different industries. And for those who've spent any time building software, it really is just kind of applied problem solving every day. And so that I kind of fell in love with that aspect of it. And then the insurance piece of things, I think I came by it honestly, which is to say that I stumbled into it entirely. I had a friend who'd spent some time in the insurance industry, and they were just always telling me about how this piece of the industry is so inefficient, or this part is so hard because there's no technology. And I just kept hearing these stories over and over until something in my brain kind of tripped, and I was like, all right, I really got to go figure this out for myself, see if it actually is like these many opportunities to go and bring technology to the table, and how I might actually do that. And so, being someone who likes to really get into a problem deeply, I just spent about, in the end, a year just hanging out in agencies, talking to agents, really trying to understand how the business works and trying to look for, common problems, whether I was sitting in an agency in, California, Connecticut, Utah, Texas, like what are the things that are common and what are the things that are different? And, something that just kept coming up over and over and over again was this problem of getting information between different systems, right? And sometimes it would be, from a carrier into the management system, or a carrier into the CRM, or the CRM into the, the carrier. And I saw, double entry, triple entry, sometimes quadruple entry of data. And the thing about these workflows is like, no one likes doing that work, right? Of course it has to get done, but no one's sitting there like excited for the first 2 hours of the day where all they do is move information between these different systems. And so that's where I started to see, like, not just this big problem, but also how we could solve it, right? With that technology background, seeing what we could bring to the table to be able to do this in an automated way. And so that's really where kind of Adapt came from, why it exists. And, over time, I've just gotten more and more hooked on this problem. And I think I've become that guy at the party who only wants to talk about insurance, which is not always the most popular guy at the party.
We have a saying inside HawkSoft that no one chooses insurance. You're either born into it or you fall in love with it. And I definitely feel that way. If I had told my past self, like, you're going to be super into insurance in your late 20s and 30s, I've been like, what? Like, who are you? But I can definitely tell from all of our conversations that you have a genuine passion for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way often. If I think 5 years ago, or if you took myself 5 years ago and said, hey, you're going to be building a company in the insurance industry and you're going to be just endlessly fascinated by it, I would have definitely had at least some doubts. And yet here we are. And I can see this being something that I work on for a very long time.
Absolutely. So if you had to pick an aspect of Adapt that draws in and keeps a customer with you, what would that be?
Yeah. And I think, I can give you kind of an overarching thing and maybe talk about a specific example. But as I think about what the kind of core underlying driver behind a lot of what we do is, it really comes down to kind of like simplicity and seamlessness, right? Our goal is to solve these problems, but not just solve them, do it in a way that is kind of minimal effort, really understanding kind of like the need of the agency to make sure that we kind of get out of the way. Because we know that these are workflows that need to get done, but again, are not things that people want to spend a lot of time working on, thinking about. And so that's really what kind of imbues everything that we do. And so to talk to like a specific use case that a lot of our agencies get a lot of value out of, I think it's useful to walk through kind of like the late pay process.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
And for the agencies listening along at home, this is going to sound very familiar, but I'm sure many of you have maybe someone in the office or maybe you have someone outsourced who's logging into a bunch of carrier sites every day because they're going to check for late pay reports. Often these things don't download. You don't get notified till it's a cancellation, so you have someone go hunting for this. And depending on the agency, that could be 5 different websites and reports that get generated each day. That can be 40 different websites and reports. And once those are downloaded, then someone's kind of copy pasting that, maybe putting it into the management system, maybe then double entering it into a CRM or picking up the phone and calling them one by one. And it's just, a very arduous process. It's important, but it takes up a lot of time. And also, I've yet to find anybody who likes doing late pay calling or texting, right? It's just not a nice part of anyone's day. And so when we looked at that process, with that kind of lens of simplicity and seamlessness, we thought, how can we make this more effective, more efficient, and get the same job done? And so we did a couple of things. I mean, first of all, we designed it so that you wouldn't have to do anything with us every day, right? There's a little bit of setup, but everything else is going to happen automatically behind the scenes. So it's not yet another to-do that your team has to remember to do and learn. And then we set it up so it would actually collect those reports for you, which is step one, but we also standardize it for you. So
Mm.
if you're going out to a bunch of different places to pull reports, what you know is, the names of different fields are different. Sometimes the actual values of the fields don't match up. And so you have to do a little bit of, moving things around to get things to work. And so we do that for you as well. And that, is a great starting point. But we didn't stop there. We said, okay, well, then what happens next? Well, what happens next is you often want to, at the very least, record that in your management system. And so then we took the next step of, working with HawkSoft and saying, hey, is there a way that we could actually take that step? Could we put this information in that management system automatically so that there's no involvement whatsoever for the agent on a day-to-day basis? And of course, I had this conversation with you, Ken, and you were like, that would be amazing. Like, let's make it happen. And so we did exactly that. And today we can actually not just collect the information, not just standardize the information, but actually put it all the way into the management system with suspense so that the right person gets notified when there's, a pending cancellation, for example, keeping with this late pay theme. And more so than that, because of the, wealth of downstream integrations from HawkSoft, then that can also become an automatic text message, an automatic email, a ringless voicemail, so that rather than it being, we get it to HawkSoft and someone still has to pick up the phone. Now you can actually have it totally hands-free. So there's a little bit of setup up front, and we're talking like 30 minutes of setup up front, and the rest of it just runs on autopilot every day. And so that's kind of, I think, a very specific example of how we really try and focus on simplicity and on the end user experience for our product.
Yeah. So because we like our open and transparent conversations, Kirk, does that jive with your experience using Adapt in the agency?
Well, I think we were the third customer for Adapt, and so we were the one that brought to Jacob the idea of the pending cancellation notices, because it's one of the few things that actually doesn't download. There is no Ivan's transaction, there's no information, and so it's a huge time saver for us. Not only does it aggregate into, when we're calling them manually, it aggregates to a list where they have one worksheet to work from, but it does create those tasks and you can automate directly from there. So it works exactly as you described it. And from our perspective, the amount of time saved in trying to log into, I think we have 9 to 15 different pending cancellation downloads that are coming in. We're downloading 15 a day, 10 a day from 9 or 10 different carriers at a minimum. And oftentimes we'll see that it saves us between 10 and 15 hours a week.
Oh, wow.
Just going, instead of trying to go in and manually, each website, someone's going to take 10 to 15 minutes. That report's aggregated in their inbox before they start their day.
Wow. That's amazing.
So, yeah, works as described.
Perfect. So, this is always, we got to rearrange where this question falls, because this is always a strange pivot. But one of the things that attracts a lot of our agency customers to HawkSoft is we have a position that we are very upfront about, in that an agency owns their data. We try to advocate and push for that position. From our perspective, what that means is an agency has the freedom to take and use the data that they cultivate and that they gather however they wish to use it. With that in mind, how does Adapt API approach data ownership with regards to your agency customers?
Yeah, and I think to keep it very simple, we have more or less the same perspective as you do, which is the data belongs to the agency. We process it on their behalf. We use it to provide value to the agency, but at the end of the day, it is their data, and so we're not selling it out the back door or something like that. And that's very clear in our contracts, because I think that through various points in history, sometimes that's happened, and so we want to be very clear where we stand. And I think it's also awesome that HawkSoft has a similar perspective.
Perfect. And that's honestly the softer question before we get into the one that can cause some sparks. So we're in a dialogue between technology providers and insurance professionals. You have the benefit of being, you are probably geographically closer to Kirk than I am right now, but we are all still in remote areas. So what I'll say is, you can probably answer this as honestly as you want. What is the hardest part of working with insurance agencies?
It's funny. Was there a being remote comment, because I'd have to worry about you guys coming over and yeah. Just checking. Well, I'll be sure not to send my address anywhere in the chat. But no, I think that two things come to mind with this question. And the first one, and I think there's like really understandable reasons for both of them. But the first one is I think there's, a little bit of, I want to say, more than healthy skepticism around technology in the insurance industry. And, the reason I say it's very understandable is, of course, everyone's been burned at least once, right? With overpromise, underdeliver kind of situation. And so I understand why that kind of like response has developed. But it does mean that as a technology provider, even if you really are trying to kind of like understand the problem, like build a very kind of customer centric product, you still tend to get grouped into that, broad grouping, or people kind of respond to all technology in kind. And so it has been a continual challenge for us to really just kind of get in front of agencies, get them to kind of like be willing to, just hop on a call and learn what we do. As you can imagine, usually once you get to that point, then the excitement starts to build. There's still maybe a little bit of skepticism, but we're pretty quick to show value. So it's not like we're saying, hey, sign up in 36 months, you'll finally see the value of this product, right? So I think that helps us kind of overcome that challenge. But that has certainly been, and I think also because we're a little bit earlier stage company, so there's, we have a little bit less of a reputation. I'm newer to the insurance industry, and so that certainly has been I think a bit of a challenge with kind of like working within the industry. And as a result, it can just be a little bit hard to kind of get in front of people to start with. And then I think the other thing that's difficult, and I think this is just a function of the just like the industry as a whole, is that when you've seen one agency, right? Everyone has their own set of tools they like, their own set of processes they like, their own set of carriers they like. I mean, once you go through all the different dimensions along which people can have their own preferences, you start to realize, you're never going to see the same agency twice. And so as a company that's trying to bring some level of standardization or streamlining to the industry, sometimes a challenge that we run into is that even if we solve a problem but don't solve it the same way someone else wants it solved, then they'll say, well, yeah, I mean, it saves me an hour a day, but it's not quite like, it's an hour later than we want it to be, or there's these little things that aren't quite exact, and so that's certainly been a challenge that we've seen as well. And I think that over time, as the business grows, as we start to build in some more customization, that becomes less and less of an issue. But it does seem like in some cases, perfect can become the enemy of good. And we're still trying to figure out how to kind of like work around that.
I think it's interesting to watch that conversation. We're probably technology forward in many ways, but there's a lot of agencies that have faced a lot of challenges with, one, their data, getting it out of a different vendor and getting over here. So when they talk to someone like Jacob, they see a lot of skepticism because they've been burned in the past. What is the age of an average principal in an agency's? Mid-50s, early 60s. So they didn't grow up in the technology era. They had to adapt to it as time came along. And so understanding the adoption of technology and how it may work together is probably more difficult for some of us. I've seen that multiple times where they get stuck into a legacy software and it's like, well, I know the software, I'm just going to use that. I don't want to learn something new. I don't need anything else because it's working and I'm not going to break it. And so there's a lot of, don't break what's working. Well, the challenge is the way technology is moving forward is if we don't continue to evolve and develop and be better, we're probably one of the most technology backward industries I've seen in a very long time. If you start to step into the software industry or any other service related industry, how they process and manage client data and work with their clients moving forward is much, much more advanced than most of us in the insurance space. So I would say, Jacob, and you could disagree, that that's probably a challenge that you're going to see quite often when walking into some of those larger legacy agencies is it's working now. Why do I want to add to? It's just going to break it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do hear that, certainly as a common piece of feedback. And I think that, Kirk, to your point, as long as no one's kind of, as long as the status quo stays the same consistently enough, you can kind of, that attitude can prevail and it can work for you. I mean, I think you guys are a classic example of people who are like really pushing the envelope, and as a result, seeing kind of like what kind of results I can get you, and as a result of like been able to build a a really kind of like top tier agency. And I think that what the missing piece maybe is that it's hard for people to know what's possible when they haven't seen the delta, right? And so if they've seen the same thing for 10 years, 20 years, and so they haven't seen that like step function improvement, and so it's hard to really even conceptualize what that looks like. And it's something that we're still trying to figure out is how to communicate that, and build that trust so that people know that there is a much better like possibility, much better option, kind of future available. It just takes a little bit of faith, a little bit of trust.
It's interesting to watch how, if you streamline your agency, how many less people you need to manage the same clientele. And you start looking at our primary cost in the insurance industry is human capital. And so how do you maximize your human capital to do the things that they do best, which is have conversations with people, not processing data, not doing those other things. And so, Adapt is one of those. VAs are part of the reason why that's coming along too, is where you can start maximizing the use of human capital, whether it be through a virtual assistant, through technology, and it should be both.
Yeah. And so your reach is expanded, and you can do more with your current team that you might not have been able to do beforehand. And I think you're absolutely right. Definitely in the last few years, we've seen agencies just absolutely stopped in their tracks when a CSR retires or a bookkeeper leaves. And I think technology is one of the solutions there to say, hey,
that's the number one reason an agency is selling right now, is if an aging principal has their key employee who's handling the majority of the service and support of that agency retires, they don't see a way out of it. They don't see a way to step forward. And how do you streamline and maximize the team that you have? So
I think technology plays a big part in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, sorry,
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think also, often we'll hear people say, hey, we have like a people problem, right? Like we can't hire and retain great talent. And my response to that is usually, well, yeah, if you like find someone great and then you say, by the way, 2 hours of your morning is going to be doing copy paste, they're probably going to look for greener pastures, right? And so by making sure that the people that you've taken the time to hire, like vet, train, to do high value work for agency are doing that work and not this other stuff is really important, not just for like short-term efficiency, profitability, all those other things, but also for the long-term kind of sustainability. And it's not not just from retiring. People might decide, hey, I'm going to go work in another industry that's going to value my time differently. Or, I mean, we even see, someone goes and gets a knee surgery or something, and then suddenly the person who you used to rely on to do these critical day-to-day workflows is gone, and there's no institutional knowledge. Nobody understands how it works. It's all in their head. And you kind of just hope nothing bad happens for 2 weeks until they're back in the office. And so none of those situations are great places to be. And so I think that's really where a lot of this technology can add a lot of value.
Yeah.
It's also, if we talk about having a people problem, you're not going to recruit the generation in their 20s if you don't have technology accessible to them. In fact, that's how we got our last recruit. She's 23. She was manually typing W-2s on a typewriter at her previous employment. And so, you step into that technology, embrace it. What she's able to do with technology in that space, she's 4 to 5 times more productive, which brings, she feels more value. Obviously, it's higher value for us. She can manage more premium dollars per client. All of the things add into place. So, yeah.
I love that conversation. I was going to ask how we solve for that, but I think you both hit on it really well. It's just we have to do a better job of emoting the way that technology benefits an agency in not the scary terms. It's not, here's all the training you're going to have to go through, here's all the processes you're going to have to redo. It's, here is how much more clientele you're going to be able to serve. Here's how much easier it's going to be to recruit a younger generation. That was a great a great conversation there. And I want to keep the good times rolling. This is the ointment to the harder question before it. But Jacob, I'd love to know your perspective on what is the best part of working with insurance agencies.
Yeah, I think, and this is something that surprised me a little bit, but I just love how kind of cohesive and how much of a community there is in the IA channel. most other industries, you don't see people helping each other so much just out of the goodness of their hearts. Like they're not getting any benefit from it. They're just like, hey, I found this thing that works well for me. Let me tell you all about it. I just think that's so cool because it's actually pretty rare to have that kind of a community, certainly on a bigger than 10 people living in the same neighborhood, right? This isn't because, hey, we know each other for 20 years and part of the same community. This is, hey, we understand each other from our day-to-day profession. And as a result, we're just going to help each other out. And that's, whether it's mastermind groups, Facebook groups, I mean, these different meetups that people get involved in. It's just been really awesome to kind of see that and to start to be at least some part of that. So I think that at least was the most surprising piece of it for me. And one of the things I've really come to enjoy. I mean, take today, for example, Kirk isn't getting anything out of this. He volunteered his time today. He's showing up, talking about kind of, what we've done with his agency, just so that other agents can learn about it and help out. And, I mean, Kirk has done this and many other of our customers have done this too, where they just reach out to other people, let them know. I mean, it really kind of, again, just to, try and share the knowledge to other people. And so it's just been really cool to kind of see that in action.
I think that's been a transition. I would say, Kenny, I don't know how long you've been. I've been in the industry 22 years. When we first started, it was the scarcity mentality. I mean, everybody had a limited amount of resources and you're fighting for those resources. I just got off the phone with an agency partner, another agency owner today. He and I and a third agency owner, all in Utah, we're going to go to lunch and mastermind on how we can help each other. We have slightly different niche focuses. We refer business back and forth. I referred clients to him. They refer clients to me because we work in different areas. I would agree with you. I think that the insurance marketplace, there are still some of those out there, but for the vast majority, there's a lot of agency owners that look at it and go, even if I wrote all the premium within a 2-mile radius of my agency, I would have more business than I could ever do.
Yeah.
So there's enough to do out there. How do we get better at what we want to do?
I think I completely agree with Jacob's perspective there and that observation that it's such a relationship driven industry and it's so collaborative. I think one of the best things about companies in this space, agencies and technology providers, is we're so close that we start to emulate a lot of our each other's behavior. We try not to talk a lot about HawkSoft on this podcast, but something HawkSoft will do often is if we don't feel like an agency is a right fit for us, we will look at our peers in the space and say, here is maybe a better management system for you. And that's something we learned from our customers. We learned it from agencies saying, hey, you know what? I don't write this kind of business. I'm not an expert at it. I could, but if you go down the street, competitive business, but they'll take a better care of this risk for you. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about the insurance industry.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've learned a lot about Adapt API here today. We have made some allusions and references to this. We'd like to end this part 1 with a little bridge to tantalize folks to come back to part 2. So Jacob, as a two-way API partner with HawkSoft, how does Adapt work with our HawkSoft management system? What key functionality do you have?
Yeah, so what we're able to do with HawkSoft's two-way API is all the different kind of notifications that we're pulling and documents that we're pulling from carriers directly. So those can be PDF documents that aren't downloading, especially on the commercial side, audits, renewals, endorsements, late pays, all those types of things, and then any other notifications, claims, etc. So we're collecting those from the carrier, but what HawkSoft enables us to do is actually match those up to the policy in HawkSoft, and then actually write log notes, create attachments, create suspenses, and configure that so that the right person is getting notified at the right time for the different types of transactions. And so that's really kind of what's happening behind the scenes each day is we're doing that kind of automatic collection, standardization, processing, and matching in HawkSoft, and then doing that upload so that when the agent shows up, they pull up HawkSoft and everything's just there, right? There's no more clicking around the carriers. There's no more trying to remember which ones they already pulled. It just shows up and it's, they can kind of get on with their day and focus on whether it's outreach or cross-selling or anything else that they would want to do with their time rather than, sitting there copy pasting for a couple hours each morning.
Fantastic.
Or if
Well,
you're like us, you just don't copy paste; it gets ignored.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's the other thing we see is it's so common that in the first week of a customer signing up with us, we'll get an email something like, "Oh wow, you just saved a customer of ours that we totally wouldn't have caught otherwise. Thank you so much." Basically, like, this is already paid for itself, right? In week one, and that happens probably like 1 in 4 of our customers have a situation like that. Because to Kirk's point, I mean, you just
Well,
can't
the other
really
three
like
just don't tell you.
exactly right. And so that's always really fun to see, and it also enables some other things that otherwise wouldn't make sense. Like, we have some agencies that are doing automatic claims outreach. So when a customer has a claim, they'll send a little explainer. Hey, we saw you had a claim. Here's what to expect. Like, here's the timelines. Here's my number. Let me know if you want to reach out. If you have any questions, just to understand, like, this is something that the company adjudicates, but we're happy to kind of be a partner in this, or explain anything you need to explain. And what that means then is you don't have somebody coming back 60 days later feeling like the experience was poor and it was somehow your fault, right? And realistically, it's just, you're not going to have somebody do that across 15 carriers every day to stay on top of claims, right? It just doesn't make sense. But if it shows up automatically, then it totally changes the calculus. And so there is a lot of these things that previously didn't make sense that we can actually enable through our kind of integration with HawkSoft.
Fantastic. Well, Jacob, thank you so much for talking with us about Adapt API, and Kirk for chiming in along the way. Thank you to our listeners. This has been part 1 of our series focused on Adapt API. We have appreciated you listening and hope you join us next week for part 2 of the Insurance Perspectives podcast on Adapt API, where we interview Kirk Chester and explore how Adapt API is helping the Grit Insurance Group. Thank you for watching today's episode. Click the video's description below to learn more about our guests and to view the latest podcast episode, as well as other content from HawkSoft. We appreciate you watching and hope you join us next time on the Insurance Perspectives podcast.